Hello again. It's time for us to talk about HTTP requests so that we can understand the types of requests that are going to come into our web server, our web application. Uh, there are, first, the really big one is a GET request. And so the GET request comes in and it has with it some path. All right. So again, remember our URLs. We've got our protocol, HTTP or HTTPS. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be one of those. It's all going to be handled automatically for us. Next is the host name. Again, that's just so that they can come find us. It's our host name. We don't worry about that. Then we've got everything after the, we might have a port number, and again, we don't worry about that. All right, so then everything after the port, if it exists, is part of our path. All right, and our path might have on it a query string as well. So an example of a GET request could come in, so we could have some examples over here. We could have an example, which is we could have a GET, and maybe we get the path is /search, and we have some sort of query string on it, where we're, the query is equal to hello. Who knows? All right. So that's what comes into the server, and then that goes into our routing mechanism, and we would be looking for a matching pattern in our routing system that says for a GET and a path like /search, we should handle it with a particular method, which is basically us saying it's some method of some controller. We'll get to this. All right. The other type of request that comes in is a post. And a post has with it a path and data. All right. And so what generates this? Well, it's a submission of a HTML form to the path. All right, so the HTML form will specify some path that it should be, when the data is collected from the user, that it should be submitted to this path. So again, comes into our system, we go through our routes, we find a matching path, then we'll go and we'll find a matching controller. A controller is an object, and then we'll have a controller and an action. An action is a method on that controller, and we'll go run that code in our application. So again, that's the same sort of idea. We're going to get some sort of request. These GET requests, these are generated by people clicking on links, okay? The post requests are generated by people submitting HTML forms. Link is going to be some URL, and the URL would be for us. Great. And then we've got a form that we have on a web page that says send the data to this URL, basically, and we would then receive that and process it. There are also delete as HTTP paths, as requests, and we could have a path, and this can have with it a path and maybe has data. So it doesn't require to have data, and in our cases, everything that we see is not going to have data. It's just going to be some path. All right, it's going to be some basic location on our web server, and we're going to get a delete request for that location. Likewise, there is a patch request, and that comes into a particular path. Plus, it does also have data. So this is basically, we would like to read something. We would like to insert something. So this is, we basically want to read. We want to create or insert things. Usually that's the case, but it doesn't always have to be a creation, but it's no matter what, it's definitely a submission of data to us, and then we could process that data in some way. Maybe we do save it to the database, maybe we just use it to compute something to return back to the user. Then a request to delete something, and it's identified, whatever it is that wants to be deleted is identified in this path. A patch is all about updating. I want you to update something, and I'm going to give you some data, and it's this thing at the path that I want you to update with this data. So patches are like posts, but with the notion that it's not making it, usually it's changing it, okay? Now there is one thing to note about both a delete and a patch HTTP request. These are actually not possible to have in HTML. The web browsers have no problem. You know, it's a protocol for HTTP, no problem, but it's the issue that HTML does not actually define these. HTML only defines gets and posts. And so Rails does use these, and Rails fakes them with a post of a form, all right, plus special data to identify as a delete or patch. So the reality is that there will actually be a post request coming in, but because they come in with some extra data, we're able to actually know whether it's a delete or a patch. We will never ourselves put in the extra special little data, but we will form in a Rails, using proper Rails commands, how to form the HTML such that Rails, when it generates that HTML, will then, when the user submits the form here or there, along comes this extra little bit of data. And so yes, the delete does got to have some data if we're to actually detect it as such, rather than just a plain old post. You can largely forget about this, except for the fact that it means that when you write routes, when we write mechanisms in this routing system to say, oh yeah, I want to handle a delete request that comes to this path with a call to some controller and its action, you need to know that on your HTML creation, which is what you do in your view, that you've used the proper Rails methods so that you actually end up inserting the correct delete or inserting the correct patch. Again, a lot of this will be, you'll see this in how we cover things in the homework, all right? The homeworks are a bit more of a tutorial style, as well as, oh, now go do this. So there's going to be content in those as well. And I may come back to this in future lectures for you. All right. So two important things to note about gets and posts are as follows. And it's something that we need to really remember, that a get, whenever we do something to generate a get request, so again, people clicking on links. So we're the ones who put the links in the HTML page, and then we're going to handle that get request when we get it. We're going to say, oh yeah, it matches this pattern, this path, and I'm going to call this controller's action. So we are the ones who handle that. What's important that what we do is, a get, can run code, read the database, but does not change data. So we can read some code, we can run code, we can read from the database, all those sorts of things. but it always is basically a read operation or some computation, but such that we don't change the system. All right. Every time the GET request is run, it returns the same data. Now this is within reason. Sure, you could have something that's the database, the state could be changing, the time could be changing, all sorts of things, but it's basically when it's run, I think it returns the same data is probably not the right way to put it, but it returns the same data is one way to think about it, but the big thing is, does not change state of the system. We want GET requests to only be behind read actions. And a big part of this is people might refresh things. We can have crawlers from Google come through the site. And if doing GET requests, for example, deletes data or inserts data, and we have these automated robots going through our website, horrible things can happen. If users bookmark a GET request, and the GET request is to delete or let's imagine a GET request is to submit a shopping cart. Every time they accidentally hit that link, they fire off another order. Disaster happens. So it's all about basically GETs have to be a safe operation. That's same data isn't quite run, quite the thing. It's but it's a safe operation, something along those lines, so to speak. We wouldn't mind, or a user wouldn't ever mind that GET request happening lots. You as a website owner wouldn't mind it happening lots because it's not really changing anything. It's just reading things and computing stuff and returning stuff. Okay, it doesn't change the underlying state of the system. So when we design it, we have to think of and use our GET requests in that fashion. And the reason we have to think about it is we are the one who handles the GET request when it comes in, and we run code. If we were so foolish as to run code that changes the database, that's our fault. All right, so it's up to us when we program to be sure to do the right thing. Now, posts, on the other hand, are there. They're always, designed to send some sort of data to process. And in general, these are either going to be to do some sort of insert, or create, whatever you want to call it, an update, or a delete. It is possible for you to have posts that don't change the state of the system. Absolutely. I just need to send some data and I'm going to compute something for you and send it back, and I don't actually change anything. So that's possible. So that would be the send data to process, and in general, these are insert, creates, updates, or deletes. And I guess we'll put in the word here, possibly also. So I'm not spelling possibly right there, but possibly also either actually changing the state of the system. But if we need to send in a bunch of data and we're not really changing the state of the system, usually what we would do is we'd want to do it on a GET request with a query string. We want to send in the name, value, parameters as part of the query string and run it that way. If we want to change the system, we aim to do it with posts, okay? And if we're not trying to change the system, we do it with GET requests. And sometimes it's just a design decision about what's the right thing to do. But absolutely, you shouldn't put things that change the state of stuff under a GET request. That's an absolute no-no. Don't ever do that. If you just have something that takes in a bunch of data and processes it and returns something without actually changing the state of the system, fine, you could have that as a post. But don't change the system via gets. That's the big no-no here. All right, so that's the notion, that's the basic set of requests. Let's talk about, in particular, this notion of REST. And so the software as a service textbook makes quite a big deal of this, and it is actually a big deal. It's a really good thing, and it's something that we want to strive when we build our web systems as much as possible that we think in terms of REST. And REST, it happens to stand for Representational State Transfer. And it is a way to use HTTP in a systematic fashion for making actions and changes to a website where we think about the web app in terms of resources that it holds. And resources can be obvious, like, yes, it contains a database table of books, and we're going to add and change books from that database. It can also be in a much more abstract fashion, such as, yeah, we're going to play a game and I'm going to create a new game to play. Maybe there's nothing changing in the actual database, but there's this notion of a game being a resource that can be created, it can be updated, we can read things from it and so forth and so on. So it's a way to think about the web app in terms of resources and the basic operations that we can do to a resource, and how do we formulate this in terms of what sort of paths should we be using with what sort of HTTP requests, whether a get, a post, a delete, or a patch. And so let's take a little bit more look at this. So REST basically is, again, we have an HTTP request, and we call them verbs. So the verbs are, again, get, post, patch, and delete. All right, we have a verb plus a path. All right, the idea is we take the verb plus the path. All right, all of this then turns into, this is a methodology for us for how to identify a resource and an action to take with that resource. All right, it's best to look at this with an example. So let's say we're maintaining a collection of songs. All right, so we'll go an example, a collection of songs. And this is, something about the songs. Maybe we record the song title, the song artist, the year, who knows what, but it's some sort of collection. I actually shouldn't say list. Let's say it's a list. It's easier to think of it as a list of songs. This is a resource that we are supporting in our web app. We're maintaining this list. All right, so we look at our HTTP verb. We look at what's the path that came in, and then what sort of code are we actually going to be using on the server. So to act in a RESTful manner, so you'll see people say that, yeah, we built the website in a RESTful manner, meaning, yep, we're using all this notion of REST and we made sure that our website, all of our paths that we have on it and the actions that can be taken and stuff with these HTTP verbs, we followed the basic recommendations of what REST says we're supposed to do. And so let's show the standard. If we had songs as a resource, we would create the following RESTful routes, okay? So it's a verb plus a path basically gives us, and then what's the code? This whole thing is the idea of how do we route a request to code, all right? So we come in with a get, and our path would be /songs. And this standard thing, the code for this, so when we say get songs, so /songs, the code's job is to fetch songs from our database and return a list of them. And since we're building a web app with HTML, we would return them in a nice HTML list. We could also build our web app to return it in a special data format like JSON, or if it was the olden days like XML. But today, people would be doing it in JSON. So that's JSON, which is a special format. But we're not going to do that. We're going to send ours back in HTML. So it would be an HTML page that lists all of the songs. We can do, when we do a get and we do songs/new, and so this is the thing about RESTful. RESTful is saying you should be creating these sort of combinations of get and path, a verb and path, to mean this thing that you're going to do. And so you should have something that's your resource name, songs, and then /new. When you get this with a get, the idea is for you to make return an HTML form. So this is some web page that has an HTML form on it for adding a new song to the database. Now, many of you don't know what an HTML form is. That wasn't part of the HTML labs that we've had so far. We'll get to that, but just think about it again as it's, it's like a paper form where it says fill in these blanks. It's like you've seen numerous times on the websites where it's, you need to type in something into fields. Behind the scenes, there's an HTML form there. You type in that stuff and you hit a button. That's to submit. You hit a submit button. It grabs all your input, packages it up so that it knows, oh, that was your name you gave me. This was your email you gave me. This was your date of birth, whatever. Packages it all up and sends it on in. So this is when we say we want a new song, get new song, it means I want a form so that I can type in the stuff so that when I submit it, you'll actually make and add a new song to it. All right. So the thing is that that's the idea here, is that this form that's sitting on some web page, once it's filled out, we say it is posted. So we're going to use hitting the form creates a post request to a certain resource. It's posted with the form data to this /songs. Now, it's posted to /songs. We have a get songs here. So /songs does not uniquely identify these requests that come in. Oh, it's posted. All right. So it's a post. So get songs means go read all the songs and give me a nice list of them. A post to songs means you're sending me data to go and create a new song and add it into my database. All right. So this is what we're going to do here, is have code to add the song info to the database. Okay. Now, that's great. We can see our songs. We can get a page that'll give us a form that when we fill it out and hit submit, we send that form with a post to /songs to add that new song that we typed in to the database. Now, what if we want to look at detailed information about an individual song? All right, so that we do as a get /songs/ and then we give an ID. And so this is an ID. This is an example ID. 2. Could be 56, could be 42, 78, whatever. But this says, I want to see song with the identifier 2. All right, think back to what we've been talking about with models and in Rails, and that every model has a unique identifying ID. Here we go. So this is sort of basically it. Yes, I want you to go to whatever you have basically for your model for songs, and I want you to go find and get an object in there which has the ID 2, and let's show it to me then. And then so this means the code you're going to do here is to display info about the song with ID equals to 2. All right. And again, REST is just about telling you this is the way that you should treat and behave with regard to these paths. You shouldn't just make up some ad hocery thing. You should be very systematic and follow a standard method, and you will then fit very nicely into Rails because Rails believes in this, but also you'll end up designing an easier to develop web app. It will behave in a reasonable, sensible fashion that if you just tried to invent this all on your own, you probably on your first try are not going to end up with something as well designed. All right, then, all right, so I'm gonna wipe this and keep going. I'm running out of space on the board. All right, so let's say we wanted to edit it. Well, what do we do there? Well, we do a get whatever resources, songs, which one we want to edit, and then we say, we add on a /edit. Okay, so again, this is our ID, and this would be replaced with whatever the ID of the song is that we actually want to be editing. All right, but this, again, it's like the new. Notice it's a get. So this is not about changing it. This is about getting back something that will then let me edit it. All right, so this is all the code that you have to write for this. When you get a get and a pattern like this, would be you write code to return the HTML for editing the info about the song with ID equals to 2. So return HTML for editing the info about song HTML. So this is return an HTML form. So you got an HTML form, and if you do it really nicely, you fill that form out with the existing data for song with ID 2. So that you, oh yeah, you've already put the title of the song there. Oh yeah, it was a spelling fix I wanted to make. So that's easy. I just edit it. I don't have to retype the whole thing from memory or something. So you fill out this form. It exists. You're just sending back HTML, and then this form sorry, this form, then this form is submitted by the user when they press a button. Via a post. So the form includes the data that they typed in. And to make things better, via a patch request. It will be a post because it's a form, but because we're going to be using Rails, when we create the form for editing, we're going to be very careful and be able to show, yes, we are actually doing a patch request. So it's going to do a patch request, and that patch request is basically as follows. So we've got a patch. So we gets us the form, a patch to songs/2. So when we put a patch to songs/2, it means to actually update the data. We also had a get for songs/2. So again, we get to get this difference between a get request for a same path and another type of request, a patch, which means let's go do a different action on that. And so this is the code that we're going to run here is to update the song with ID equals 2. All right, so we received some updated data. It gets via a patch request sent in to this path. All right, this path with a patch request and that data, we go run code to actually do an update in the database then. And then last is we can get a delete request for a particular song. All right, so a delete request for the song, it means, yes, go and delete the song with ID equals 2. All right. So anything that we have in the database, anything in our web app that we can model as a resource, and resources are going to be things that we can think about, yes, I would like you to show me basically the resource. So that's a get request. And in the case of a whole bunch of items like songs, it would show me the list of them. Oh yeah, I want to be able to create a new resource. All right, so we have a get with a resource name /new. Gives us a form back. Once we submit and post that form, a post to songs or post to the resource path, all it means create this insert in the database and so forth and so on. So if we can think about things in these terms, we can model a huge amount of our application in terms of resources, which in a RESTful fashion tells us design these paths and use these following requests, and we'll have a nice way to organize all of the code that we write on the back end. All right, we'll have a good way to manage the views. We'll have a way to manage how do we route these requests to the right code. It just tells us this is a good way to do things and keep yourself organized, and you'll end up then doing gets and posts so that gets are only basically fetching data. It's never changing the state of the system. And it's the post requests, which include also the patches and deletes, which are designed to change the system. So we follow REST, we put all that together, and we end up building better web apps. All right. I just want to add before I finish here that I gave the previous bit of lecture on Rails models, and I had forgotten to mention what that reading was. It's in the SAS book. So this is the official textbook for software as a service. That the models, to read about the basics of models, is section 4.2. So chapter 4, section 4.2 is what we need to read there. And it's basically it's Rails models and talks about databases and active record. So my apologies for not mentioning that at the start of that talk. This was the stuff that comes back. This was talking about REST. That's all sections 3.5 and 3.6 in the textbook. And so we've gotten through this week through covering, the basics of what is a web app, what's the infrastructure, what's the overall architecture. Well, we've talked about model view controller, we've talked about URLs, we've talked about what type of requests we have, the idea of building a RESTful system, and then how do we do the basics of our models. So all we really are lacking now are some of the fundamental, the practical bits of how do we put this all together into Rails. And so there are other things to talk about with web apps. So I've mentioned with the models, with associations and validations and other sorts of things. And there's lots more, of course, to talk about. But some of the practical details, that we're going to cover these in the homework. And so you'll actually see, oh, this is how I, make a controller. And then, yes, okay, I have actually made a model. And all right, so how do we go and we make a view and put this, how do we tie it all together? We'll cover a lot of that in the actual homeworks. All right,